My father left me standing on the side of a dark highway 35 miles from home in pouring rain because he said I needed to learn respect, and the moment his taillights disappeared into the storm, I knew this would be the last time he ever tried to teach me anything. The rain was cold and relentless, hitting my skin like tiny frozen needles, and I stood there soaking wet watching the empty roads stretch endlessly in both directions while thunder rolled across the black sky above me. My clothes clung to my body heavy with water, and my hair plastered itself against my face, but I didn't cry and I didn't panic because I knew something my father didn't know, and that knowledge kept me warmer than any coat ever could. The argument had started over something small like it always did with him, a comment I made at dinner that he decided was disrespectful even though I was just stating a fact, and before I knew it, he was screaming about how I had no idea what real life was like and how I needed to be taught a lesson I would never forget. He told me to get in the car, and I obeyed, because that's what you do when your father is 6'3" and built like a linebacker and has a temper that can turn a quiet evening into a war zone in seconds. We drove in silence for what felt like forever, the windshield wipers beating back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm while rain hammered the roof of his truck, and he didn't say a word until he suddenly pulled over on a stretch of highway surrounded by nothing but fields and darkness. "Get out," he said, his voice flat and emotionless, and when I looked at him confused, he repeated it louder, this time his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath his skin. I asked him what he meant, and he told me I knew exactly what he meant, that I was getting out right here, right now, and I was going to walk home, and maybe that would teach me to watch my mouth around him. I stared at him in disbelief because we were 35 miles from home in the middle of a thunderstorm, and it was already past 9 at night, but his expression didn't change, and I realized he was completely serious about this. So I opened the door and stepped out into the rain, and before I could even turn around, he was already driving away, leaving me standing there alone on the shoulder of the highway with nothing but the clothes on my back and a phone in my pocket. The sound of his engine faded into the distance, and I was left with only the roar of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder overhead, and for a moment, I just stood there processing what had just happened. Most people would have panicked or started crying or maybe tried calling their mother, but I wasn't most people, and my situation wasn't like most situations because there was something my father didn't know about me, something I had kept hidden from him for months now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, water dripping from my fingers as I unlocked the screen and opened my contacts, and I scrolled down to a name that made me smile despite the cold and the rain and the absolute absurdity of what my father had just done. His name was Marcus, and he had been my bodyguard for the past 6 months, assigned to me by my grandfather, who, unlike my father, actually gave a damn about my safety and well-being. My grandfather was wealthy beyond measure, a self-made billionaire who had built his fortune from nothing, and who had always treated me like I mattered, like my life had value, and when he found out about the way my father treated me, he made arrangements without telling anyone. Marcus was former military special forces trained and completely loyal, and his entire job was to keep me safe without anyone knowing he existed, and he had been following me everywhere I went for half a year now, always staying just far enough away to remain invisible, but close enough to intervene if anything went wrong. My father had no idea Marcus existed, and that was exactly how my grandfather wanted it, because he knew my father's pride would never allow him to accept help, especially not from a man he resented for being more successful than he could ever hope to be. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, make sure to click that subscribe button right now, because we're building something special here, and your support means everything as we work toward reaching 1,000 subscribers. I pressed Marcus's number, and he answered on the first ring, his deep, calm voice coming through the speaker asking if I was all right, and I told him exactly where I was and what had happened, and there was a long pause before he simply said, "Stay where you are, I'm 2 minutes away." I smiled at that because, of course, he was 2 minutes away. He was always 2 minutes away. That was his job, and I slipped my phone back into my pocket and wrapped my arms around myself, trying to preserve what little warmth I had left while I waited. The rain continued to fall harder now, and I could barely see 20 feet in front of me through the curtain of water, but I wasn't afraid anymore because I knew Marcus was coming, and when he arrived, everything was going to change. True to his word, exactly 2 minutes later, I saw headlights cutting through the rain, and a black SUV pulled up beside me, its tires splashing through puddles as it came to a stop. The passenger door opened and Marcus leaned over from the driver's seat, his face expressionless, but his eyes concerned as he looked me over, taking in my soaked clothes and shivering frame, and he told me to get in without any preamble. I climbed into the warm interior of the vehicle and immediately felt the heat blasting from the vents, and Marcus reached into the back seat and pulled out a thick blanket which he handed to me before asking if I was hurt. I told him I was fine, just cold and angry, and he nodded slowly, his jaw tight, as he processed what I'd told him over the phone, and then he asked me a question that made my heart race with anticipation. Do you want me to take you home, or do you want to handle this differently? And I knew exactly what he meant by that, because Marcus wasn't just a bodyguard, he was also a problem solver, and right now my father was a problem that needed solving. I told Marcus I wanted to go home, but not alone, and I wanted my father to see us arrive together, because I wanted him to know that his little lesson had failed spectacularly, and that I was never going to be at his mercy again. Marcus smiled at that, a rare expression on his usually stoic face, and he put the SUV in gear, and we headed back toward my house with me wrapped in the blanket, slowly warming up while we drove through the storm. We didn't talk much during the drive, but the silence was comfortable, not tense, and I felt safer in that moment than I had felt in years, because for once I had someone on my side, someone who actually cared whether I lived or died, and who wasn't going to let my father's cruelty go unchecked. When we pulled onto my street, I could see my father's truck already in the driveway, and the lights were on in the house, which meant he was probably inside telling my mother some bullshit story about how I had been disrespectful and needed to learn my place, and how he had taught me a valuable lesson about consequences. If this story is resonating with you, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers, because every single subscription matters, and it only takes one click. Marcus parked the SUV right behind my father's truck, blocking it in, and he turned off the engine and looked at me with those calm, steady eyes and asked if I was ready, and I nodded, because I had never been more ready for anything in my life. We got out of the vehicle together, and I was still wearing the blanket around my shoulders, but I walked with my head held high, because I had nothing to be ashamed of and everything to be proud of, and Marcus walked beside me, his presence commanding and impossible to ignore. I opened the front door without knocking, because this was my house too, and I walked straight into the living room where my father was sitting on the couch with a beer in his hand, looking completely relaxed, like he hadn't just abandoned his daughter on a highway in a thunderstorm. The moment he saw me, his expression changed from relaxed to confused, and then when he saw Marcus walk in behind me, his face went completely pale, and his eyes widened with something that looked like fear. He stood up quickly, almost knocking over his beer, and he demanded to know who the hell Marcus was and what he was doing in his house, and his voice was loud and aggressive, but I could hear the uncertainty underneath it, because my father was a bully, and bullies always back down when they encounter someone who isn't afraid of them. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He just stood there with his arms crossed over his chest, looking at my father with an expression that was calm, but somehow more threatening than any rage could ever be, and the silence stretched out until my father started to fidget uncomfortably under that steady gaze. Finally, I spoke up, my voice clear and strong despite the fact that I was still shivering slightly from the cold, and I told my father that Marcus was my bodyguard hired by my grandfather, and that he had been following me for months, making sure I stayed safe from people who might want to hurt me. My father's face went from pale to red in an instant, and he started yelling about how he was my father, and he didn't need some stranger protecting me, and how this was his house, and Marcus needed to leave right now, but Marcus didn't move, and I didn't move, and the yelling just echoed off the walls, sounding more pathetic with every word. I let him finish his tantrum, and then I told him very calmly that what he did tonight was called child endangerment, and that if Marcus hadn't been following me, I could have been seriously hurt or worse, and that I was done pretending his behavior was acceptable. My mother appeared in the doorway then, her face pale and shocked as she took in the scene, and she looked at my father, and then at me, and then at Marcus, and I could see her trying to piece together what was happening. I explained everything to her, speaking clearly and without emotion, because I wanted her to understand exactly what her husband had done and what could have happened if things had gone differently, and with every word I spoke, I watched my father shrink a little more, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. Your support keeps this channel going, so if you haven't already, please click subscribe and be part of our journey to 1,000 subscribers, because we're building a community here and we want you in it. My mother started crying, quiet tears running down her face, as she realized how close she had come to losing her daughter, and she looked at my father with an expression I had never seen before, something between disgust and heartbreak, and she told him in a voice that shook with emotion that he needed to leave the house tonight, and not come back until he had figured out what kind of man he wanted to be. My father tried to argue, tried to say that he was just teaching me a lesson and that everyone was overreacting, but my mother cut him off with a sharpness I didn't know she possessed, and she repeated her demand louder this time and told him to pack a bag and get out. He looked around the room at all of us, and I think he finally realized that he had no allies here, no one who was going to take his side or excuse his behavior, and his shoulders slumped in defeat. He walked past me without meeting my eyes and headed upstairs to pack his things, and I stood there with Marcus beside me and my mother across the room, and none of us said anything because there was nothing left to say. The sound of drawers opening and closing came from upstairs, followed by footsteps on the stairs, and then my father appeared with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, looking older, somehow diminished, and he walked to the door without a word and left the house. We heard his truck start up and then the sound of it pulling out of the driveway and disappearing down the street, and only then did my mother finally move, crossing the room to wrap her arms around me and hold me tight while she whispered apologies into my hair. Marcus stayed with us for another hour, making sure we were both okay and that my father wasn't coming back tonight, and before he left he gave me his card and told me to call him anytime, day or night, if I needed anything, and I thanked him because he had saved me in more ways than one. The next few weeks were difficult. My mother filed for divorce, and my father tried to fight it, but my grandfather got involved, and suddenly my father's lawyer was advising him to accept whatever terms were offered and not make waves. I found out later that my grandfather had been documenting my father's behavior for years, waiting for the right moment to step in, and that night on the highway had been the final straw that gave him the leverage he needed. My father moved into an apartment across town, and I didn't see him or speak to him for months, and honestly I was okay with that because I needed time to heal from years of his emotional abuse and manipulation. My mother started therapy and encouraged me to do the same, and slowly we both began to rebuild our lives without his toxic presence hanging over us like a storm cloud. Marcus continued to be my bodyguard, though. After everything that happened, my mother knew about him now, and she was grateful for his protection and for the role he had played in getting us out of that situation. Make sure you're subscribed because stories like this need to be heard and shared, and your subscription helps us reach more people who might need to hear that they're not alone. My grandfather visited more often after that, and he and my mother developed a relationship they had never had before, and I learned that he had been estranged from my father for years because he couldn't stand the man my father had become. He told me stories about my father as a young man, how he had been different once, full of potential and promise, but how somewhere along the way he had chosen bitterness and anger over growth and compassion and had pushed away everyone who tried to help him. It was sad in a way to think about who my father could have been if he had made different choices, but I also knew that his failures weren't my responsibility and that I deserved better than what he had given me. School became easier without the constant stress at home, and my grades improved, and I started making plans for my future, plans that didn't include my father's approval or participation because I had finally learned that his opinion of me didn't define my worth. 6 months after that night, I got a text from my father asking if we could meet for coffee and talk, and I stared at that message for a long time, trying to decide if I was ready to face him again. I talked to my therapist about it, and she said the decision was entirely mine, and that I should only meet him if I felt emotionally prepared to handle whatever might happen, and after thinking about it for a few days, I decided I would meet him, but only in a public place, and only with Marcus nearby, just in case. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a Saturday afternoon, and my father looked different, older, more tired, and when he saw me he smiled, but it was a sad smile full of regret and loss. We sat down at a corner table, and for a moment neither of us knew what to say, and then he started talking, telling me how sorry he was for everything he had put me through, and how he had been going to therapy himself, and working on understanding why he had behaved the way he did. He didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify what he had done that night on the highway, or any of the other times he had hurt me with his words or his actions, and I appreciated that because excuses would have made me walk away immediately. He told me he didn't expect me to forgive him, and that he understood if I never wanted to have a relationship with him again, but that he wanted me to know he was trying to be better, trying to become the kind of man I deserved as a father, even if it was too late for us. I listened to everything he said, and then I told him the truth, which was that I didn't know if I could forgive him, and that trust once broken was incredibly hard to rebuild, and that if he really wanted any chance at having me in his life again, he would have to prove through consistent action, over a long period of time, that he had actually changed. He nodded at that, accepting my terms without argument, and we finished our coffee in relative peace, and when we parted ways, I felt lighter somehow, like a weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted off my shoulders. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and you can help us get there. Just click that subscribe button right now and join our growing community. That was a year ago, and my father and I have what you might call a cautious relationship now. We text occasionally and meet for coffee every few months, and he has kept his word about therapy and about working on himself. But I don't let my guard down, and I don't pretend that everything is fine, because it's not, and it may never be. My mother is thriving now in a way I never saw when she was married to my father. She went back to school and got her degree, and she started her own business, and she smiles more than I ever remember her smiling before. My grandfather is proud of both of us, and he still pays for Marcus to be my bodyguard, though now it's more about having someone I trust watching my back as I navigate life as a young adult rather than protecting me from immediate danger. Marcus has become more than just a bodyguard. He's become a friend, someone I can talk to about anything, and who gives me honest advice without judgment, and I'm grateful every day that my grandfather had the foresight to put him in my life. Looking back on that night on the highway, I realize it was a turning point not just for me, but for my entire family, because it forced all of us to confront truths we had been avoiding for years. My father's cruelty had been escalating slowly over time, and if something hadn't stopped him that night, who knows how bad it might have gotten before someone finally intervened. I'm grateful to Marcus for being there when I needed him most, and I'm grateful to my grandfather for caring enough to make sure I was protected even when no one else seemed to notice I was in danger. I'm grateful to my mother for finally finding the strength to stand up to my father and choose me over preserving a toxic marriage, and I'm even a little bit grateful to my father for being so spectacularly awful that night, because it gave us all the push we needed to make real changes in our lives. The rain that fell that night washed away more than just the dust from the highway. It washed away years of pretense and denial, and forced us all to see our family for what it really was, and to decide what we wanted it to become. Please don't forget to subscribe, because your support makes all the difference and helps us continue sharing these stories with people who need them. I'm in college now studying psychology because I want to help other people who have grown up in difficult family situations, and I want to use my experiences to make a difference in the world. Marcus still checks in on me regularly, and my mother has met someone new, a kind, gentle man who treats her with the respect and love she deserves and deserved all along. My grandfather is getting older, but he's still sharp as ever, and he tells me often how proud he is of the woman I've become and how glad he is that I didn't let my father's abuse break me or define who I am. As for my father, I honestly don't know what his future holds. He's still in therapy and he's making an effort, but whether that effort will be enough to truly change him remains to be seen, and I've learned that I can't make his growth my responsibility. That night when my father drove away, leaving me in the rain, he thought he was teaching me a lesson about obedience and respect, but what he actually taught me was that I am strong enough to survive without him, and that I deserve to be treated with dignity and kindness. He thought abandoning me would break me, would make me crawl back begging for his approval, but instead it showed me that I had resources and support he didn't even know existed, and that his power over me was an illusion I could shatter whenever I chose to. When Marcus pulled up in that black SUV and stepped out ready to protect me, my father's entire worldview began to crumble, because he realized in that moment that he wasn't the most important man in my life anymore, and that other people valued me more than he ever had. The look on his face when we walked into the house together is something I will never forget. The shock and the fear and the dawning realization that he had lost control of a situation he thought he owned. If you've made it this far in the story, you're exactly the kind of subscriber we need, so please click that button and help us hit 1,000 subscribers, because we're almost there. I've learned a lot about myself over this past year. I've learned that I'm resilient, that I can stand up for myself when it matters most, that I don't need anyone's permission to live my life on my own terms. I've learned that family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand beside you when things get hard, like Marcus and my grandfather and my mother when she finally found her courage. I've learned that forgiveness is complicated and personal, and that no one can tell you when or how to forgive someone who has hurt you, and that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is maintain distance even from people who claim to love you. And most importantly, I've learned that I am not defined by my worst moments or by the worst moments of the people who raised me, and that I get to write my own story from here on out. My father wanted to teach me about consequences that night, but the consequences fell on him instead. He lost his family, his home, his reputation, and any chance of having a meaningful relationship with his daughter, unless he does the hard work of genuine change. I wanted to feel triumphant about that, wanted to feel like I had won some kind of victory, but mostly I just feel sad for the family we could have been if he had chosen differently, if he had been the father I needed instead of the father he was. But I also know that sadness doesn't mean I made the wrong choice, and that sometimes the right thing to do is still painful, and that growth often comes wrapped in grief for what could have been. My therapist says I'm doing remarkably well considering everything I've been through, and that my ability to set boundaries and maintain them shows real emotional maturity, and I'm proud of that because it means I'm breaking the cycle of dysfunction that has plagued my family for generations. Every subscription helps us grow and reach more people, so if you believe in the power of these stories, please hit that subscribe button now. There are still hard days when I miss having a father in the traditional sense, days when I see other families and feel a pang of jealousy for their easy relationships and their uncomplicated love, but those days are getting fewer and farther between. I'm building a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me and who would never dream of leaving me stranded on a highway in the rain just to prove a point. Marcus taught me that real strength isn't about dominating others or making them fear you. It's about showing up consistently, being reliable, protecting people who need protection without asking for anything in return. My grandfather taught me that success means nothing if you don't have people you love to share it with, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is give them the tools to protect themselves, and then step back and trust them to use those tools wisely. My mother taught me that it's never too late to choose yourself, never too late to walk away from something that's destroying you, never too late to start over and build something better. And my father, in his own twisted way, taught me what I don't want to become, taught me the kind of parent I never want to be, taught me that cruelty in the name of discipline is still cruelty, and that fear is not the same thing as respect. All of these lessons have shaped who I am today, and while I wouldn't wish my experiences on anyone, I also wouldn't trade them because they've made me strong and compassionate and clear-eyed about what I will and won't accept in my life. The rain has stopped now, metaphorically speaking, and I'm standing in the sunshine building a future that belongs entirely to me, and I'm not looking back except to remember where I came from and how far I've traveled. We need your help to reach 1,000 subscribers, so please take a moment right now to click subscribe and be part of this community. When I think about that night now, it almost feels like it happened to someone else, like I'm watching a movie of my own life from a safe distance, but I know it was real, and I know it changed everything. The cold, the fear, the anger, the moment of realization that I wasn't as powerless as my father wanted me to believe. All of it was real, and all of it mattered. Some people might say I should just forget about it, move on, stop dwelling on the past, but I don't think that's how healing works. I think you have to acknowledge what happened, look it straight in the eye, understand how it affected you, and then make conscious choices about who you want to be going forward. I choose to be someone who stands up for herself, someone who doesn't accept mistreatment, someone who knows her worth and demands that others respect it too. That night my father tried to make me small, tried to remind me that he had power over me, that he could hurt me whenever he wanted, and that I had no recourse, but he miscalculated badly, because I wasn't small anymore, and I did have recourse, and the power he thought he had was already slipping through his fingers like water. Marcus was my recourse, my grandfather's love was my recourse, my own growing strength and sense of self was my recourse, and when my father finally realized all of that, it was too late to undo the damage he had done. I wonder sometimes if he replays that night in his mind, if he remembers the moment he drove away, leaving me standing in the rain, if he understands now what a catastrophic mistake that was, if he wishes he could take it back. But I've learned that what he thinks and feels about it is ultimately not my problem to solve. My problem was surviving him, and I did. My problem was building a life beyond him, and my problem was becoming someone I could be proud of despite him, and I'm working on it every single day. Please don't leave without subscribing, because we're building something important here, and every single subscriber brings us closer to our goal of 1,000. The last time I saw my father, he told me he was proud of me, and I didn't know what to say to that because his pride feels complicated, tainted by everything that came before, and I'm not sure I want it anymore. I've learned to find validation from within, learned to be proud of myself without needing anyone else's approval, and especially without needing his. And that's probably the best thing that came out of all of this, the realization that I am enough all by myself. Marcus says I'm one of the strongest people he knows, and coming from a man who served in special forces and has seen real combat, that means something, and I hold on to it on the days when I feel weak or uncertain. My grandfather says I remind him of himself at my age, stubborn, determined, unwilling to accept limitations other people try to impose, and he means it as the highest compliment. My mother says I saved her too, that watching me stand up to my father gave her the courage to do the same, and that we saved each other really. And maybe that's true, maybe that's the silver lining in all of this, that we both found our strength at the same time and used it to build better lives. The divorce was finalized months ago, and my mother got the house and primary custody, even though I'm technically old enough that custody doesn't really matter anymore, and my father pays support and stays away unless invited, and we're all better for it. I've started dating someone recently, a kind, patient person who treats me well and who listens when I talk about my family history and doesn't judge me for the complicated feelings I have about my father, and it feels good to be with someone who sees me as a whole person worthy of respect and gentleness. Marcus approves of this person, which is saying something because Marcus doesn't approve easily, and my grandfather has met them too and gave his blessing, which I didn't realize I wanted until I had it. If this story has touched you in any way, please show your support by clicking the subscribe button and helping us reach 1,000 subscribers. Life is strange. Sometimes you think you know how things are going to go, and then one night changes everything and suddenly you're on a completely different path, headed in a direction you never expected, but that turns out to be exactly where you needed to go all along. That night in the rain was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me, worst because it showed me just how little my father valued my safety and well-being, best because it freed me from the illusion that I needed his approval to live my life. I don't need him. I never did. What I needed was people who actually cared whether I lived or died, people who would show up for me in the rain, people who would protect me and stand beside me and fight for me when I couldn't fight for myself. And I have those people now. Marcus, my grandfather, my mother, my new partner, my therapist, these are the people who matter. These are the people whose opinions I value, whose love I trust, whose presence in my life makes me better, stronger, more myself. My father is learning slowly, painfully, that you can't abuse people and expect them to keep coming back, that actions have consequences, that love has to be earned through consistent kindness and respect, not demanded through fear and intimidation. I don't know if he'll ever fully understand what he lost or if he's capable of the kind of deep change that would be required to repair our relationship, but that's his journey, not mine, and I've stopped making it my responsibility to fix him or help him or give him endless chances to hurt me again. I gave him one chance to hear what I had to say, to understand how his actions affected me, to take real accountability and start doing the work, and whether he actually does that work or just goes through the motions is up to him. I've learned to let go of outcomes I can't control, learned to focus on my own healing and growth, learned to protect my peace even when it means disappointing or angering people who think I should be more forgiving, more understanding, more willing to sacrifice myself for family harmony. Your subscription really does make a difference, so please click that button now and help us continue creating content that matters. There's a freedom in knowing you survived the worst someone could do to you and came out stronger on the other side. There's a power in realizing you don't need the people who hurt you. There's a peace in building a life they can't touch or diminish or take away. My father thought leaving me in that rain would break me, would teach me to submit to his authority, would remind me of my place. But all it did was show me I didn't need him anymore, and that realization was worth every minute I stood there in the cold waiting for Marcus to arrive. When that black SUV pulled up and Marcus stepped out, I knew my life was about to change. I knew my father's power over me was ending. I knew I was going to be okay, and I was right about all of it. The look on my father's face when we walked in together is burned into my memory forever. The shock, the confusion, the fear, the dawning awareness that he had made a terrible mistake and that there would be consequences he couldn't control or manipulate his way out of. That was the moment he lost me, not the moment he left me on the highway, but the moment he saw that I had backup, that I had people who cared, that I wasn't alone and powerless the way he needed me to be for his games to work. I've grown so much since that night, become so much more myself, learned to trust my instincts, learned to speak up, learned to walk away from people and situations that don't serve me, learned that being alone is better than being with people who make you feel small and worthless. My grandfather says he wishes he had intervened sooner, that he regrets not stepping in years ago, but I tell him everything happened the way it needed to happen, that I needed to be ready to accept help, needed to be strong enough to use the resources he gave me, needed to reach that breaking point before I could break free. Marcus says I would have found my way out eventually, that people like me always do, but I'm not sure that's true. I think without him, without my grandfather, without that night forcing everything into the open, I might have spent years more trapped in that toxic dynamic, believing it was normal or that I deserved it. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, and we need you to help us get there, so please click subscribe right now. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if Marcus hadn't been there, if I really had been alone on that highway, and the scenarios my brain conjures up are frightening enough that I have to remind myself that didn't happen, that I was protected, that I am safe now. My therapist says those intrusive thoughts are a normal part of processing trauma, part of my brain trying to make sense of what happened and prepare me in case something like it ever happens again, and I'm learning to acknowledge them without letting them control me. The rain has become a metaphor in therapy. The storm, I weathered the cold, I survived the moment when everything was washed clean and I could start over, and I find myself drawn to rainy days, now finding them peaceful rather than frightening, because I reclaimed that experience and made it mine. My father doesn't get to own the rain, doesn't get to make me afraid of storms, doesn't get to occupy space in my head rent-free anymore, and that's progress, real, tangible progress that I'm proud of. I'm planning to move out soon, get my own place somewhere. My father has never been somewhere that belongs entirely to me, and Marcus has already helped me scope out neighborhoods and security systems, and my mother is excited for me even though I know she'll miss having me at home. My grandfather offered to buy me an apartment outright, but I turned him down because I want to do this myself, want to know I can support myself, can build a life on my own terms without needing to be rescued even by people who love me. He understood that, respected it, even told me it reminded him of himself when he was young and determined to make his own way in the world, and we're closer now than we've ever been, bonded by everything that happened and by our shared understanding of what it takes to survive difficult families. My father has asked to be part of my future, asked if he can come to my graduation, asked if I'll invite him to important events, and I've told him honestly that I don't know that he'll have to earn that privilege through consistent effort over time, that showing up once or twice isn't enough to undo years of damage. Click subscribe now and join the hundreds of others who are already part of this community as we work toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers. He says he understands, says he'll wait as long as it takes, says he knows he has a lot to make up for, and I want to believe him, but I'm also realistic about the fact that people don't change easily and that old patterns die hard, and that he might give up when he realizes how much work is actually required. My mother has started dating her new partner, and they're talking about moving in together, and I'm happy for her, happy that she found someone who treats her the way she deserves, happy that she's finally living for herself instead of constantly managing my father's moods and ego. Marcus will always be part of my life, even if technically I don't need a bodyguard anymore, because he's become family in the truest sense, someone I choose, someone I trust, someone who has proven over and over that he'll show up when it matters. The night of the rain, the night my father left me, the night everything changed, that night was over a year ago now, but it still feels present somehow, still informs every decision I make, still reminds me of who I am and what I'm capable of surviving. I've learned that strength isn't about never being scared or hurt or vulnerable. It's about feeling all those things and choosing to keep going anyway, choosing to believe you deserve better, choosing to build something beautiful out of the broken pieces. My father tried to destroy me that night, or at least diminish me, remind me of my supposed place in his hierarchy, but he failed spectacularly because I refused to be destroyed, refused to be diminished, refused to accept his version of reality. I chose instead to reach out to people who loved me, to accept help, to let myself be protected, to believe that I mattered enough to fight for, and that choice made all the difference between who I might have become and who I actually am. There's a kind of poetry in the fact that the worst thing my father ever did to me became the catalyst for the best changes in my life, became the moment when everything shifted, became the story I tell to remind myself that I'm stronger than I know. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because your support helps us create more content and reach more people who need these stories. Looking back, I can see now that my father was struggling with his own demons, his own anger and resentment and feelings of inadequacy, and that he took all of that out on me because I was there, and because he could, and because somewhere along the way he forgot that being a parent means protecting your child, not using them as an emotional punching bag. I can see that intellectually, but emotionally, I'm still working on separating his issues from my worth, still learning that his inability to love me properly says everything about him and nothing about whether I'm lovable. My therapist says this is lifelong work, that children of abusive parents carry these wounds forever, but that doesn't mean they have to define our lives, and I'm learning to believe that, learning to imagine a future where my father's voice in my head grows quieter and quieter until it's barely there at all. That future feels possible now, feels close enough to touch, and that hope sustains me on the difficult days when old doubts creep in, and I start to wonder if maybe I'm being too hard on him, too unforgiving, too unwilling to give him another chance. But then I remember the rain, remember the cold seeping into my bones, remember watching his taillights disappear into the darkness, remember standing there alone wondering if this was finally the moment he had gone too far, and I know that I'm not being too hard, that I'm being exactly as hard as I need to be to protect myself from someone who has proven repeatedly that he will hurt me if given the opportunity. My boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection, and I don't owe anyone access to me, especially not someone who has used that access to cause harm, and the fact that he's my father doesn't change that fundamental truth. Marcus reminded me of this when I was wavering a few months ago, when my father sent me a long emotional text about how much he missed me and how he was trying so hard to change, and I felt myself softening, felt that old familiar pull to make things easier for him, to absorb his pain, to sacrifice my own well-being for his comfort. Marcus asked me one simple question. He asked if my father had actually demonstrated through actions, not just words, that he had changed. And when I really thought about it honestly, the answer was no, he hadn't. He had gone to therapy, yes. He had stopped drinking, yes. He had said all the right things, yes. But he hadn't actually done the hard work of examining why he treated me the way he did, or making amends in any meaningful way, or showing up consistently over time to prove he was different now. Words are cheap, actions are what matter, and I've learned to judge people by what they do, not what they say they're going to do, and by that measure my father still has a very long way to go before I can trust him again, if I ever can. My grandfather says trust is like a piece of paper. Once you crumple it up, it's never quite smooth again, no matter how carefully you try to flatten it. And that's how I feel about my relationship with my father. It's been crumpled and torn, and even if we manage to tape it back together, it will never be what it was. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some things aren't meant to be repaired. Maybe some relationships have run their course, and the healthiest thing is to acknowledge that and move on. If you're still watching, please do me a favor and click that subscribe button, because we're working hard to build this channel, and your support means absolutely everything to us. I've been thinking a lot lately about forgiveness and what it means and whether I owe it to my father, and I've come to the conclusion that forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, it's something you give freely if and when you're ready, and only if it serves your own healing. And right now I'm not ready, and I might never be ready, and that's perfectly okay. Some people think forgiveness is necessary for healing, but my therapist says that's not true, that you can heal and move on without ever forgiving someone who hurt you, that forgiveness is optional, not required, and that what really matters is that you don't let the person who hurt you continue to have power over your present and future. I'm working on that, working on taking back the power my father took from me, working on building a life so full and rich and beautiful that what he did becomes just one chapter in a much longer story instead of the defining narrative of my entire existence. The rain that fell that night washed away more than just the illusions I had about my father. It washed away the version of myself who believed she had to accept mistreatment, who thought she was powerless, who didn't know she had people who would fight for her. And that girl is gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knows her worth and won't settle for less than she deserves. I'm grateful to that girl, though, grateful that she survived long enough to become me, grateful that she held on through all the hard years, grateful that when the moment came she was brave enough to reach out to Marcus instead of trying to handle everything alone. Sometimes survival is its own form of courage, and I'm learning to give myself credit for all the times I survived when it would have been so much easier to give up, to believe my father's narrative about me, to accept that maybe I really was as worthless and difficult and disrespectful as he always said I was. But I didn't accept that, and I'm still here, and I'm thriving, and that's the best revenge, if revenge is even the right word, because this isn't about hurting my father, it's about healing myself, it's about proving to myself that I can build something beautiful out of the wreckage he left behind. My mother and I talk about this sometimes late at night over tea. She tells me about her own journey of healing, about unlearning all the things my father taught her about herself, about rediscovering who she was before she met him. And I realize that we're both doing the same work, both reclaiming ourselves, both refusing to be defined by his cruelty. She apologizes sometimes for not leaving sooner, for not protecting me better, and I tell her what my therapist told me, that she was also a victim, that abuse makes you doubt your own perceptions, that she did the best she could with the resources she had, and that ultimately she did leave, she did protect me, and that's what matters. Make sure to subscribe, because every single subscription helps us grow and reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and we're so close now thanks to people like you. We're building something new now, my mother and I, a relationship based on honesty and mutual support instead of the old dynamic where we were both just trying to survive my father and keep the peace at any cost. And it's hard sometimes because we have to unlearn so many patterns. We have to figure out how to relate to each other without him as the central organizing principle of our family. But it's also good, it's also healing, it's also worth every difficult conversation and every moment of discomfort. My grandfather watches all of this with quiet satisfaction. He doesn't say, "I told you." So even though he absolutely could, he doesn't gloat about being right about my father. He just supports us and tells us he's proud of us and makes sure we have whatever resources we need to heal and build our new lives. He told me recently that hiring Marcus was the best decision he ever made, and I agree wholeheartedly, because Marcus didn't just protect me physically, he protected me emotionally and psychologically by showing me what a good man looks like, by demonstrating through his actions what it means to truly care about someone's well-being. Marcus has become something of a father figure to me, though I would never say that out loud because it feels disloyal somehow, even though I know it shouldn't. My actual father lost the right to that role when he abandoned me on a highway in a thunderstorm. But Marcus embodies all the qualities I wish my father had: patience, consistency, reliability, genuine care, concern for my safety and happiness, and never once has he used his position of authority to hurt me or diminish me or make me feel small. I asked him once why he cares so much, why he goes above and beyond what his job technically requires, and he told me that he sees in me the daughter he never had, and that he made a promise to my grandfather to keep me safe, and he takes his promises seriously. But more than that, he said he likes me as a person, respects me, admires my strength, and wants to see me succeed in life. That conversation meant more to me than he probably realizes, because it was the first time an adult man in my life told me he valued me without any conditions or expectations attached, without needing me to be someone I'm not, without requiring me to earn his approval through perfect behavior. Your subscription matters, so please click that button now and help us hit 1,000 subscribers, because we're building a community here and we want you to be part of it. The healing process isn't linear. I have good days and bad days, days when I feel strong and confident, and days when I feel like that scared girl standing in the rain all over again. But the bad days are getting less frequent and less intense, and I'm learning to ride them out without panicking, without believing they mean I'm not actually making progress. My therapist says trauma healing looks like a spiral. You pass through the same emotional territory again and again, but each time you're at a different level, each time you have more tools, more insight, more capacity to handle what comes up. And I find that metaphor helpful when I'm struggling, when I feel like I'm going backwards, when I wonder if I'm ever going to fully get over what happened. The truth is I might never fully get over it, and that's okay too. I might always have this tender spot, this wound that never quite heals all the way, but that doesn't mean I can't live a full, beautiful, meaningful life. It just means I'm carrying something, and I've learned to carry it with grace. I've started writing about my experiences, not for publication necessarily, but just for myself, as a way to process everything that happened and to document my journey so that someday when I'm further along I can look back and see how far I've come. Some of what I write is angry, raw, unfiltered rage at my father for what he did, and at myself for taking so long to stand up to him, and at the world for not protecting me sooner. And my therapist says that anger is healthy, that I need to feel it fully before I can move through it to whatever comes next. Other things I write are more reflective, exploring questions about family and loyalty, and what we owe to people who share our blood but not our values, and whether DNA really creates an unbreakable bond, or if that's just something we tell ourselves to justify staying in toxic relationships. I don't have all the answers, yet maybe I never will, but asking the questions feels important, feels like part of the work of becoming a fully realized person who makes conscious choices instead of just reacting to old programming. My father doesn't know about most of this internal work I'm doing. He doesn't know about the therapy or the writing or the late-night conversations with my mother or the way Marcus has stepped into the role he vacated. And honestly, he doesn't need to know because this isn't about him anymore, it's about me. For so long, my entire life revolved around managing his moods, anticipating his reactions, trying to be good enough or quiet enough or obedient enough to avoid his wrath. And now I'm learning to live without that constant hypervigilance, learning to make choices based on what I want instead of what will keep him calm, learning to take up space without apologizing for my existence. It's harder than it sounds, this business of learning to live for yourself when you've spent your whole life living for someone else, but it's also incredibly freeing, like taking off a heavy coat you didn't realize you were wearing until suddenly you're not wearing it anymore, and you can move more easily, breathe more deeply, exist more fully. Don't forget to subscribe. We're so grateful for every person who joins this community and helps us work toward our goal of 1,000 subscribers. The thing about trauma, especially family trauma, is that it rewires your brain, teaches you that the world is dangerous, that people who claim to love you will hurt you, that you can't trust your own perceptions or instincts, and unlearning all of that is painstaking work that happens incrementally over months and years, not all at once in some dramatic moment of revelation. Every time I make a choice that honors my own needs instead of prioritizing someone else's comfort, that's healing. Every time I set a boundary and maintain it even when people push back, that's healing. Every time I feel afraid and do the thing anyway, that's healing. My therapist says I'm reparenting myself, learning to give myself the unconditional love and support my father never gave me, and at first that concept seemed weird and impossible, but now I understand what she means. I'm learning to be my own safe place, my own advocate, my own fiercest protector. And I have help. I have Marcus and my grandfather and my mother and my therapist and my partner and a small circle of friends who know my story and love me anyway. And that support system is everything, is the scaffolding that holds me up when I feel like I might collapse under the weight of everything I'm processing. My father had none of that. He pushed away everyone who tried to help him, isolated himself in his anger and bitterness, refused to do the hard work of looking at his own pain and trauma, and so he stayed stuck in the same patterns for decades, hurting everyone around him, especially the people who loved him most. I used to think maybe if I loved him enough, if I was good enough, if I tried hard enough, I could save him, could make him better, could heal whatever was broken inside him. But now I know that's not how it works. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You can't love someone into wholeness. They have to do that work themselves, and all you can do is decide whether you're willing to stand by and watch, or whether you need to step away to protect yourself. I chose to step away, and I don't regret it, even on the days when I miss having a father, even on the days when I see other families and feel that old familiar ache of longing for something I never had and probably never will have. My grandfather says sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that's destroying you, even if walking away means being alone, even if it means disappointing people, even if it means accepting that some things can't be fixed. And I think he's right. I think there's profound courage in knowing when to quit, in recognizing that not every relationship is worth saving, in prioritizing your own well-being over someone else's feelings. My father would say I'm being selfish, would say family is supposed to stick together no matter what, would say I'm ungrateful and disrespectful for setting boundaries, but I've learned that people who benefit from your lack of boundaries are always going to be angry when you start enforcing them, and their anger doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Please take a moment to subscribe because it really does help us, and we're working hard to create content that resonates with people who need to hear these stories. The rain that fell that night has taken on almost mythical significance in my mind. It's become the dividing line between before and after, between the girl I was and the woman I'm becoming, between powerlessness and agency. Sometimes I drive past the spot where my father left me, and I feel a complex mix of emotions: anger at what he did, pride in how I handled it, gratitude for Marcus, and my grandfather's sadness for the family we might have been if my father had been different, and underneath all of that, a quiet confidence in my own resilience. I survived that night, and I've survived everything since, and I'll survive whatever comes next, because I know now that I'm not alone, that I have people in my corner, that I'm capable of more than I ever imagined. When I was standing there in the rain watching my father drive away, thinking, maybe this is it, maybe this is the moment everything falls apart. But everything didn't fall apart. Instead, everything fell into place. The pieces rearranged themselves into a new configuration, and yes, it was painful. And yes, it required letting go of hopes and dreams I had about my father and our relationship, but what I got in return was freedom and safety and the ability to build a life on my own terms. I'm not going to lie and say I'm glad my father left me on that highway. That would be giving him too much credit, but I am glad for what came after. I'm glad Marcus showed up. I'm glad my mother found her courage. I'm glad my grandfather had been planning and preparing for years. I'm glad I had the resources and support to turn a nightmare into a new beginning. Not everyone gets that kind of support. Not everyone has a Marcus or a grandfather with means or a mother who eventually finds her strength, and I'm aware of how privileged I am in that sense, aware that my story could have gone very differently if the circumstances had been even slightly changed. That awareness makes me want to use what I've learned to help others who aren't as lucky, who are still trapped in situations like the one I escaped, who don't have bodyguards or therapists or family members with resources. And that's part of why I'm studying psychology, part of why I want to work with young people from difficult family situations. I want to be for someone else what Marcus and my therapist and my grandfather have been for me. I want to be the person who shows up, who believes them, who helps them find their strength, who reminds them they deserve better. I want to break the cycle, not just for myself, but for as many people as I possibly can, because if my pain can be transformed into purpose, if my trauma can become the foundation for helping others, then maybe it means something. Maybe it wasn't all for nothing. My father's cruelty doesn't get to be the end of the story. It gets to be the beginning of something new, something better, something that ripples outward and touches lives beyond my own, and that feels like redemption, not for him, but for me, for the scared girl in the rain, for everyone who has ever felt powerless and alone. We need your subscription to keep growing, so please click that button and help us reach 1,000 subscribers, because together we're building something meaningful. I think about the future a lot now in a way I couldn't when I was still living under my father's roof, still walking on eggshells, still never quite knowing which version of him I would encounter on any given day. Now I can make plans, I can dream, I can imagine a life that includes graduate school and meaningful work and healthy relationships, and maybe someday children of my own who I will love unconditionally, who I will never abandon, who I will protect with everything I have. Breaking generational cycles is hard work. It requires consciousness and commitment and a willingness to do things differently, even when the old patterns are deeply ingrained, even when you don't have a model for how to do it right. But I'm determined to do it. I'm determined to be the parent my father never was, to give my future children what I never had, to create a family where love isn't conditional, where mistakes are met with patience instead of rage, where everyone feels safe and valued and heard. Marcus says I'll be a great mother someday when I'm ready, because I've done the work to understand what went wrong in my own childhood, and I've made conscious choices about who I want to be, and those are the things that matter most. My grandfather says the same thing, says he can't wait to meet his great-grandchildren, says he knows I'll raise them with love and wisdom and strength, and that confidence from people I trust means everything, means I'm not doomed to repeat my father's mistakes, means there's hope for a different future. My mother worries sometimes that she didn't give me a good model for motherhood, that maybe watching her struggle for so many years damaged me in ways we don't fully understand yet. But I tell her that watching her finally find her courage taught me more than any perfect example ever could, that seeing her choose herself taught me it's never too late to change, that her journey is part of what gives me hope for my own. We're all works in progress, all of us carrying wounds and scars and trying our best to heal, to grow, to become better versions of ourselves. And there's something beautiful in that, something hopeful in the fact that we're not stuck, that we can change, that today's choices shape tomorrow's reality. My father is also a work in progress, I suppose, also trying in his own fumbling way to become better, though whether he'll succeed remains to be seen, and honestly isn't my responsibility to monitor or manage. I've had to let go of the need to know how his story ends, had to accept that I might never get the closure or the apology or the acknowledgement I want, had to make peace with the fact that some questions don't have satisfying answers, and some relationships don't get neat, tidy resolutions. Life is messier than that, more complicated than the stories we tell ourselves about how things should go, and learning to sit with that ambiguity, that uncertainty, that lack of resolution is part of growing up, is part of becoming an adult who can handle complexity without needing everything to make sense. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, because your support helps us continue creating these stories and building this community toward 1,000 subscribers. The rain has stopped for real now, not just metaphorically. The storm that was raging that night has passed, and the sun has come out, and I'm standing in the light, feeling its warmth on my face, knowing that I made it through, knowing that the worst is behind me, knowing that whatever comes next I can handle it, because I've already survived the unsurvivable, already walked through fire, already emerged on the other side, scarred but intact, broken but healing, afraid but brave. My father thought leaving me in that rain would teach me a lesson, and he was right, it did teach me a lesson, just not the one he intended. It taught me that I'm stronger than he ever wanted me to be. It taught me that I have people who love me more than he ever could. It taught me that his power over me was always an illusion maintained only by my belief in it, and the moment I stopped believing, the spell was broken, and I was free. Marcus pulled up in that black SUV, and everything changed. My grandfather had been planning for years, and everything changed. My mother found her courage, and everything changed. I found my voice, and everything changed. And now here I am on the other side, building a life my father can't touch, telling a story he tried to write, but that I'm finishing in my own words on my own terms. The look on his face when we walked into that house, when he realized I wasn't alone, wasn't powerless, wasn't his to control anymore, that look is something I'll remember forever, not because I take pleasure in his pain, but because it marked the moment when the power dynamic shifted irrevocably, when he stopped being the author of my story and became just a character in it, a supporting player whose role was diminishing with every passing day. He wanted to be the center of my universe, the sun around which I orbited, but he burned too hot, destroyed everything that came too close. And so I moved into a different orbit, found different sources of light and warmth, and now he's just another star in a vast sky, visible if I choose to look, but no longer the defining presence in my life. That's growth, that's healing, that's what it looks like when you take your life back from someone who tried to own it. That's what it means to survive, and then move beyond survival into actual thriving. I'm not just surviving anymore, I'm living, really, truly living, making choices based on what brings me joy and peace and growth instead of what keeps me safe from someone else's anger. I'm taking risks, trying new things, failing sometimes, and learning that failure isn't the catastrophe my father always made it out to be. It's just information, just feedback, just part of the process of becoming who I'm meant to be. And that freedom to fail without being destroyed is intoxicating, is transformative, is something I never had when I lived under my father's roof, where every mistake was ammunition he could use against me. Every vulnerability was a weakness he could exploit. Marcus watches me spread my wings and smiles that rare smile and tells me he's proud of me, and I believe him because he's never given me reason to doubt his word, because he's shown up every single time, because his love isn't conditional on my performance or my obedience, it just is, and that's what real love looks like. My grandfather sees the woman I'm becoming and nods with satisfaction and tells me stories about his own journey, about the obstacles he overcame, about the people who didn't believe in him, and how he proved them all wrong. And I realize that's what he wants for me too. He wants me to prove my father wrong, to show the world what I'm capable of, to build something extraordinary out of the nothing my father tried to reduce me to. And I'm doing it. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one dream at a time. If you've stayed with this story until now, please show your support by clicking subscribe, because we're almost at 1,000 subscribers and your help makes all the difference. The title of this chapter of my life, if I were writing it down, would be something about rain and redemption, about storms and survival, about fathers and